All right, here we go. Hello, everyone. Welcome back. This is lecture dos, online lecture number 2. I'm going to move my head up here because it seems a little easier. Just seems more right. I'm in my living room because my husband is on a conference call. See, there's my living room, my art wall. Sitting in the kitchen, so who knows who will walk up and out while I'm doing this. So, hi. How are you? I miss you. Today we are talking about Book of Martha, the last story in Bloodchild. And according to Octavia Butler, the Book of Martha is my utopia story. I don't like most utopia stories because I don't believe them for a moment. It seems inevitable that my utopia would be someone else's hell. So of course I have God demand of poor Martha that she come up with a utopia that would work. And what else could work but in everyone's private individual dreams? So we'll discuss this today, but first a little business. I'm not a businessman. I'm a businessman. Little JC quoting for you there. So I've been up. I put here in the syllabus and grading part of Blackboard the grading scale, the Gutman grading scale, so that you can make sense of your grades, which I have been putting in. So please check. Some of you need to be writing like significant paragraph response for the reading and discussion post. This is the only writing you're doing for this class. So I need you to actually like step it up and give me some nice meaty responses with quotes, etc., because this is your entire class grade. So some of you have been getting B's and C's. So you'll see that a B is a 3.0, a C is a 2.0. A lot of you have been getting A's. Most of them are fabulous, and I've enjoyed reading them, and it's actually just made me miss you a lot because I wish we were talking about all this in class and not me in my kitchen with my living room behind me, my family spread out across the whole house. All right, so let's talk about this story. Any other updates? I will have office hours again on Thursday morning at 10. I'll send you a Zoom invite via email in case you have any questions or you want to just talk. It's not mandatory at all. So if as long as you're turning in the work, which the majority of you are, you don't need to come to that. There's a few of you that I don't have any work for. The due dates are flexible because some of you have written me that you're just really anxious and depressed and stressed out, as am I. The due dates are every Monday, but I've never shut down the discussion posts, so you can just post them whenever, honestly. Just make sure you're doing them, though, so you don't get behind. This is our last short story that we're doing from Octavia Butler, and then we are moving on to Kindred next, which I didn't bring the book out of my bedroom. So hopefully you all have Kindred. There's one copy at the Gutman Library, but I'm not actually sure if it's open anymore. It was going to be, but then I'm not sure if the way everything's going down, I don't know if it's open or not. It really shouldn't be because those people shouldn't come to work. All right. So here we go. Book of Martha by Octavia Butler. Your reading and discussion prompts were beautiful, and I love you guys, and I'm really sad I don't get to hang out with you twice a week. So let's do a quick review of characters here. So first character is Martha. That makes sense. Her physical description, all we get to know from her is that she has a broad black face, and we'll see when she describes God that she's actually pretty tall. She's almost 6 feet tall, so a very tall black woman. Some stuff that we find out about her from the book is, why is this hair here? She was raised in a church, so when she dies, or not even sure if she dies, pauses and goes to heaven, I guess, and is talking with God, that she knows all the biblical references that he mentions to her, which we will talk about in a second, the biblical allusions in the text. And she says of where she's from, God says to her, you're going to do this work for me, and then when you're done doing this work, I'm going to send you back to earth and you will live among the lowest of them. And she's like, Been there, done that, God, thank you very much. She said, I was born in the bottom level of society. You must have known that. I was born poor, black, and female to a 14-year-old mother who could barely read. We were homeless half the time while I was growing up. Then she goes on to say, but because of her and her success as a writer, she pulled herself and her mother out of poverty. And she's like, yeah, I am not going back there. Thank you very much. So she questions God a great deal. Like, why did you choose me? Why did you choose me? And, it's kind of like the question of this story as well about, choosing a poor Black woman who's no longer poor, but has this perspective. Also choosing a writer, like someone who uses their imagination on the regular to solve the problem of humanity and humanity's self-destruction on Earth. So, a little Octavia Butler, like inserting in there that, writers are, and art perhaps is the solution to a lot of humanity's issues. And now God, he changes across the text. So the first time she sees God, she says he looks like this. Let's see. Michelangelo's Moses. So this is, this image of God. He kind of looks like Poseidon in my idea, which is actually makes a lot of sense, because if you just Google around a tiny bit, I'm no art historian, nor am I a historian of biblical times, but on the History Channel, they have this really interesting piece on this argument about Jesus and what his race was. And it says that, Jesus' physical appearance, if he's from the Middle East, he definitely is not, this blonde-haired, blue-eyed Jesus, this one that we have seen. And I know that Jesus and God are not the exact same thing. My mother would, disown me if she thought I was confused between the two. But these images of God being kind of this, super deity, like strong, muscular, big white beard, hangs out in the clouds. But Jesus, the Son of God, who was born of God, and Mary has been portrayed in a lot of popular art as this blonde, like anywhere from brown to blonde haired man with a beard and blue eyes. And they say that on this history article, even though it says in Revelation, which a lot of people think we are living in the book of Revelation now. So if you've never read the book of Revelation, you might want to read it now because it's kind of interesting. But it says that the hairs on Jesus's head were white as white wool, white as snow, and his eyes were a flame of fire. His feet were burnished bronze, refined as in a furnace. Well, this is not burnished bronze, right? Like burnished bronze is like a very super tan, like kind of coppery color. And white as white wool, if his hair is woolen, it's not like this or this, right? So there's been a lot of questions about what Christ perhaps really looked like. And then, let's see, they're saying in this article, which I thought was really interesting. Let me find it for you. Sorry to slide around here. That Jesus's image, kind of was affected by. Oh my God, I can't find the thing. We should have had this ready. But it was said it was interpreted. Jesus and God were interpreted by Roman, as in Rome, Italy, which is Greek and Roman mythology. Is pretty much looks like Poseidon with his little crown here. All he needs is a trident, even though this is supposed to be Moses. So you see this overlap between like Greek and Roman gods, and then God, Jesus, they all start to commingle and look the same. And then, of course, Christianity and Catholicism came largely out of Rome, the Roman Crusades across Europe, and then spread everywhere, et cetera, et cetera. Very crappy 5-second history. But, one of the things that people always talk about is, this perception of a Black Jesus. I guess Adult Swim has a comedy show called Black Jesus, but, a lot of people have argued over time that Jesus was not, this guy. And God, who knows what God looks like? Perhaps God is a woman. Who knows? As we will get to. So in the story, back to the book, not my rambling, we have God starts off as, Michelangelo's Moses, this guy, right? Giant. He's just like God. Larger than life man with a big white robe, etc., etc. You can just think of that Poseidon-like image. Oops. Whoa. There we go. And then as the story goes on, he changes and he changes and he changes again. So then he just becomes a man. Race is not mentioned, but he is 6 feet tall, which says in the book is about her size. So she must have been, Martha, the character in the book, must have been a tall woman. And he's her height so that they can make like eye contact. Eye-to-eye contact means you're on the same level. So there's definitely something that's being said where God moves from this top thing here to being this giant, larger than life guy to being someone where it's she can look him in the eye and they're almost equals in that way. So he's moving from being, larger than life, bigger, to being someone she can actually have a conversation with, where they're just can sit and talk. He loses the halo. He's not glowing. He's just a guy. And then the third iteration of God in the story is he is a black man. And he's so now he's a little taller than her again. So it's kind of perhaps a man that she has known and trusted, although it's not said in the text. He was a tall, stocky black man wearing ordinary modern clothing, a dark sweater over a white shirt and dark pants. He didn't tower over her, but he was taller than the human-sized version of the white God had been. Oh, so here we find out this guy was white too. All right, so super giant white God, eye-to-eye white God, slightly taller. Again, all these are men than her, but black man. And then the final iteration of God that she sees in the story is she sees God as a black woman who looks like her. And she even says to God at this point, we look like sisters. So there's so much. You could write a whole paper just on the various iterations of God in this story. And especially to ask all these questions about, what would God be like if we all of us, Christianity, saw God, or all faiths, all monotheistic faiths, Christianity, Islam, Judaism, saw God as a black woman instead of as this dude, right? What would that be? How would our imaginations be totally different? We're asking the question, is God you? Is God you? Are we each individually holy in some way or powerful in that way to change the lives of others? Is God a reflection of who we are as people? At the end, it's almost she's looking in a mirror at herself. So are we each God? Is God our everyday work, our everyday life? Is God just an everyday person and not necessarily this, larger than life deity? It's a lot to be unpacked here. A lot. All right. So that's the character of God to go over. All right. So the setting. So heaven too, Martha has been working all night on her novel. She stands up and all of a sudden she's in this endless grayness. It's around 5 a.m. Just FYI, that is a prime time for heart attacks. Early morning heart attacks are the most common. She doesn't think this, I'm just telling you that. But she ends up in this endless grayness. So first heaven is just nothing, right? And then, she's walking with God at some point and she's just what are we walking on? He's what do you want it to be? So then she constructs this setting, which is almost like a giant city park. So think about Prospect Park or Central Park, where it's this long, healthy green lawn with trees and the sun shining, not like today, and the sky is blue, there's some clouds. It's like that perfect time of the year, like May or early June. So then she starts to construct her idea of this like utopia or a heaven. And then at some point she ends up like boom, like back in her home. And I know that we're all like trapped in our homes right now, but this idea that your home or your own little nest is your utopia, your private setting, which really begs the question of the reader, like, what would your heaven be? Like, if you could construct it yourself, what would it actually be? And I'm sure that a lot of us would not choose to be in our homes right now if we actually could choose anywhere. I was thinking as I was writing this, I was like, oh, what would my heaven be? Like, oh, I think I'd go down to the beach, North Carolina, and the water be warm, but still be kind of empty, But I am thankful to have my home, of course. All right, so next. So we've gone through setting, characters, God, Martha, boom, 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 plot. All right, simple plot. You guys all read it. Seems you all got it. Martha wakes up, or she stands up from working all night. She ends up in heaven, quote unquote, with God. God tells her, quote, "You will help humankind survive its greedy, murderous, wasteful adolescence. Help it find less destructive, more peaceful, sustainable ways to live. If you don't help them, they will be destroyed." Okay, thanks. God says he's not going to destroy them himself, but they're well on the way of destroying billions of themselves by greatly changing the ability of the earth to sustain them. Octavia Butler writes a lot about human destruction of our planet by ourselves, largely by, capitalism and greed and suffering of certain groups of people. This is very much a precursor to Parable of the Sower, which we will read last. So a lot of these ideas are kind of hints at future work that she's going to really develop into much longer pieces, as in a novel, as opposed to a short story. So Martha decides, after much thinking, her first thought was to make it so everybody can only have 2 children to control population. And God kind of like pushes back a little bit on this. Do you see this gray hair standing up right here? It's like a unicorn horn. God pushes back on this and says, if you limit them to humans to 2 children each, then eventually they could actually make themselves extinct because children die. And they also will find any way possible to make more kids because humans are smart and they find workarounds for everything. So you could try that. And this made me think about the one-child law in China and how, well, I wouldn't say people have been trying to find workarounds for it. It did lead to a lot of unintended consequences, such as people, if you really wanted a son, but you're pregnant with a daughter, how people would have abortions, and or the huge overpopulation right now of middle-aged men with no women to marry because people chose sons over daughters because they have more earning potential, and now these sons have nobody to marry. Which again was written about in some other book called An Excess Male that I read. Okay, so next. Oh, so Martha decides her ultimate decision. She thought about population control. God said that's going to backfire. I don't think that's a good idea. So then she decides to give human dream experience where while you're dreaming, you can have your own personal utopia, whatever that is. So if you're like a megalomaniac while you're dreaming, you can have this massive, like controlling, like power hungry, like everybody obeys you situation. Or if your ultimate utopia is like, a house full of cats, you can have a dream, you can dream about that. But that while you dream, you'll get this satisfaction so that while you're awake, you won't be kind of driven to these things. Like you can kind of lead a more peaceful waking existence because all of your desires that are known and unknown will be satisfied in your dreams. And then at the end, she also adds that the dreams will also serve as like a teaching mechanism for humans so that when they are awake, they'll be smarter about the choices they make. So somehow the dreaming makes them more woke. See what I did there? I made a joke. I made a joke. Okay. All right. Tons of biblical allusions in this piece. God says to Martha, I have a great deal of work for you. As I tell you about it, I want you to keep 3 people in mind: Jonah, Job, and Noah. Remember them, be guided by their voices. So Jonah was the one who God asked to do some work for him, and he was like, I don't want to do it. And so then he got swallowed by a whale and trapped in the whale's stomach until he was like, all right. Job was just like tested by God about all these horrible things happening to him, and his faith maintained. And so then God rewarded him at the end. And Noah is the whole story of God telling him that the world was going to be flooded. So you need to build an ark and take 2 of each animal and your family and save yourselves so you can repopulate the earth. You see this? People are joking about this now. I just saw this on one of my social media posts. It says, if by chance you see someone constructing this, please let me know. It's a giant ark. Oh, people are funny, man. These biblical allusions are everywhere. So since Martha was raised, as we saw earlier, in a religious home by her 14-year-old mother, she knew the stories of Jonah, Job, and Noah. And Martha, which is on this YouTube page that I made for you, and the Book of Martha resources here.
Mary and Martha.
I don't think you can see
10,
this.
Verses 38
or hear it. I've heard that the sound doesn't. So Martha was the sister of Mary. So the story goes. And Jesus came over to their house, and this is when Jesus was like going around preaching, and everybody thought he was, like the hot tamale. So he comes over to their house, everybody like sits down, and he starts like Jesusing and preaching, and Martha's like running around, and she's like getting everybody some tea, and she's, getting people some snacks and all this stuff, and she's like sweating like a beast, and then she's pissed. Because, she's been doing all this work. She's been like grinding and grinding and grinding while everyone else is just like, oh, Jesus, tell us about blah, 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 blah. And so she says, Jesus, like, WTF? Like, don't you think it's unfair that, like, of course, none of the men were doing anything. So she's not mad at the men for not doing anything, because I'm sure they just didn't do anything. But she said she's mad. She says, Jesus, like, WTF? Like, don't you think it's unfair that I'm running around like busting my butt trying to like serve everyone? And Mary, she's just at Jesus' feet, like, oh, Jesus, tell me a story. And Jesus says, oh, Martha, Martha, Martha. Like, Mary, just like, don't worry, stop working so much. Like, be more like Mary, and like, live in the present and listen to me now, and don't worry about all that other stuff. I actually hate this story, if I can be honest with you, because as a workhorse, I find it really insulting. But, I do get the live in the present part of it. But Martha is a character who's always grinding. Like, she's grinding, like, she's got the hustle going on, whereas Mary is just like the type of character that like lives in the moment. And Jesus is telling Martha like she should just like calm the F down and live in the moment a little bit more. Which, again, I can't say this is my favorite biblical story, but anyways, Martha in the story in the Book of Martha, she's a grinder too. Like, she grew up in poverty, but she became a writer. She became very successful. This could be very much be Octavia Butler in this narrative. Like, she really is like the Martha of the story. But the name suggests that perhaps, the Marthas in the world every so often should pause, which is hard for us Marthas to do. My mother's name is also Martha, and so she told me the story all the time. And she's a grinder too in her own way. All right, sorry that this PowerPoint is like a disaster of design. I started using this one PowerPoint template that had these clouds in the background, so it'd be like heaven. But then I found it really hard to read because it was just white text everywhere. And my eyes were bugging out. And so I changed the design, but the design wasn't cohesive or coherent. And so I had like 4 different designs, slide designs here, and it makes me a little uncomfortable, but I just couldn't deal. All right. Huge theme in the story is that all of our perceived realities are a construct. that what I consider real and true and what you consider real and true. And, it's 30 people in this class. So we have, including me, 31 different versions of what is real and true, because there is no reality, like a true reality, a 100% true piece. So there's a couple quotes here that God says to Martha. He says this one twice. You see what your life has prepared you to see. I mean, this quote isn't just like some heavy stuff, especially in terms of our theme for this class, which is the racial imagination. Like, your life prepares you to see things in a certain way, which is why he says he chose her as a poor Black woman to be the one to make a decision about how to save humanity, because she's lived a life through this unique perspective that's individually hers. He also says, everything is real. It's just not as you see it. So your version of real is real. My version of real is real. Like, her version of real is real because it's real to her, even if I can't see that reality. So this is where I wish we had class, because we could watch like all of these things. So I put some resources on the YouTube page here. So if you go back to my channel, let me shut this out. So under the Book of Martha resources, if we can just stop the Bible stuff here. This is very much relating to Plato's allegory of the cave, which hopefully some of you learned in an intro to philosophy class. I think the 6-minute one is better, which is really interesting. It's a story of men who live in the cave and they think the shadows are real until one man escapes and he realizes that shadows aren't real, that shadows are just a shadow of the real thing. And he goes back, he has this massive, wake up, and he goes back and he tries to tell everybody in the cave, oh my God, the shadows aren't actually real. But everyone's like, oh, you're stupid. Like, so, and then of course I had to put a reference to the Matrix here. I don't know if you guys have seen the Matrix because you're babies compared to me, but this is one of the whole questions of the Matrix is reality versus this constructed fake reality you might believe is real. So watch some of those if you want to dig a little deeper and into this question of what is real, what is not. This is also like a really interesting question given the situation we're living in present, and that some people are saying, the coronavirus is real. Like this shit is real. There are bodies in trucks outside of hospitals now of dead people. And then there's other people in the country who are not seeing it. And they're like, oh, it's not that big of a deal. Everybody's overreacting. We should start the economy back up. Like, send everybody back to work. Like, this isn't really that big of a deal. So you have these two massively conflicting ideas of reality that some people are living and other people are not at all. So they're like, oh, you're overreacting. This is not real. Whereas the people who are living it are like, oh, this is real. So you can see how reality, both things are true. They're just different versions of true. Another theme that comes up in this that we didn't talk about in your reading discussion post is Martha as a Christ figure. So the decision that she makes at the end, she makes a choice that she thinks is going to help mankind, although it's going to take away her livelihood, because she writes books, and books are largely where people go to escape. So if I can escape in my head at night and I don't need to read to go to this fantasy world, would I still read books for pleasure? Probably not. So she does this knowing that she's making a decision that she's going to lose her job for it, lose her money, so maybe she is, as God said in the story, going to fall back down in the ranks because she'll go back to being poor because she's going to lose her way of making money. Another question that is not explicitly raised in the text, but it's a good question, is, would the world recognize a second coming of Christ or a new prophet if she were a poor Black woman? Like God chose in the story Martha, a poor Black woman, to make this choice and decision for humanity. And in the end, she makes a decision that will hurt herself, although help humanity. if that were to actually happen in some way, shape, or form, would our kind of like society with very limited racial imagination, because we only see what life has prepared us to see, would we even be able to recognize that this person is the new prophet? Like, I don't know. It's a really great question. And so in the very end of the story, this is one last question to leave you with. God gives Martha the choice that you can either remember this interaction with him and that you made this choice about the dreams and this decision, or you can go back to your house and have no recollection of it whatsoever. And she chooses to have no recollection whatsoever. She does not want to know or remember this at all. Would you do the same thing? What would you choose knowledge, or would you choose ignorance, like just not knowing that you had anything to do with any of this? With the she asks at another point in the book about other people who have made decisions and how they've dealt with it if they've made a bad decision. And God says, sometimes people, some took refuge. This is page 201. Some took refuge in madness, some in drunkenness, some in sexual license, some killed themselves, some survived and lived long, fruitful lives. Like people who, made decisions and lived with them. But she chooses not to know. It's just one of these like philosophical questions. Like, would you rather know, or would you rather just like be a pawn in the game of existence here? So totally unrelated, but yet related. I just read this book. I read this past week since I don't sleep anymore. It's called The Dreamers, and get this, it's about a virus that affects a college town and it puts people to sleep, and they just dream the whole time, which I thought was like an interesting connection to what we were reading. And the town goes on quarantine and lockdown, and it's contagious, very similar to our current situation as well. It was interesting because some people in their dreams had prophetic dreams, like dreams that predicted the future. Like they almost dreamed in the future tense of a future life. Some people had dreams about a past. Some people had blank dreams. Like, very interesting. It was a very interesting read, and strangely connected to what we were talking about this week. Oh, wait, there's one more slide. One more slide. This is an appropriate slide too. And this really relates to Parable of the Sower, which we will read in May. Happy almost April, by the way. So it says on page 211, individuals usually know that, he's talking about here, that pleasure isn't everything by the time they reach adulthood, but all too often they don't care. It's too easy to follow bad but attractive leaders, embrace pleasurable but destructive habits, ignore looming disaster because maybe it won't happen after all, or maybe it will only happen to other people. That kind of thinking is part of what it means to be an adolescent. So God at this point in the story is saying that humankind is still at its adolescence, and Martha is tasked with getting us, humankind, through these like awkward teenage years of being stupid, but still having a lot of power. And this really comes up much more in Parable of the Sower. So I just want you to kind of like bookmark this in your brain for May when we're going through this. All right, homework. So homework for next week, read page 1 through 18 in Kindred. Watch some of the YouTube videos that I put on the channel here. If you go back to our home channel, there's Kindred resources. So, I mean, this is like a long one. Oh, what is this? Oh, this is people having a chit chat about Kindred. You don't need to watch this. Here's a book trailer, which sometimes people will make a book trailer if it's kind of like a movie trailer, but for a book. So here's a book trailer. Here's introduction to the graphic novel, which we are not reading, but we're reading the graphic novel for Parable. There's tons of school projects up on YouTube for Kindred. Just be careful because sometimes they're done by kids who don't know what they're talking about. So I know you're going to watch probably some of them, but just be aware that some of these things are made by like 16-year-olds in some high school in, Illinois or something. So not always the best information out there. This is a good book review by this girl called Brown Girl Reading. I like her. Here's some, crash courses on slave trade, just to get you thinking about the topic. So read these pages, watch a couple of the videos, and just kind of question, why would Octavia Butler write this novel on slavery? Why did she go there and touch this hot topic in American history about slavery? And she does it through time travel. So, what does that mean? So the book starts off with immediately in the very first part about a flashback where she goes back into time. So it should hopefully hook you very quickly. All right. Bye, babies. I miss you. Sending you lots of love and strength. I hope you and your families are well. Please be in touch if you need any or everything. How do I shut this down? And until next week. Next week, if you look at the calendar, I will post new work for you on Monday, but then we'll skip a week because it's spring break. So we still have our full spring break. So just take that time to stay inside still. Stay inside, but just watch 4,000 hours of TV or whatever it is you're going to do. Read the whole novel of Kindred. I was not sure what I'm going to do, but I think I'm just going to do RC stuff with my kids and watch a lot of movies because we can't go anywhere. All right. Love you.